Let's break it down straight from the hill to your hometown. No spin, no hype, just facts we find. AI's on the case, no truth left behind. Laws are written, deals are made. Who's got your back, who's throwing shade? We cut through the noise, decode the text, keeping it real. Congress in context, Congress in context, shining the light, breaking it down so you know what's right.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at the Congressional Record from February 11th, 2025. So, kind of like a like a time capsule almost. We're going to see what they were talking about that day on Capitol Hill, and try to pull out some of the big themes and some of the interesting bits for you guys. We're hoping to get into some of the major bills that were being debated.
Yeah.
Some of the key votes that happened. Any trends that we can spot in the legislation, and try to figure out what this all means looking forward for policy and governance.
Well, it's really interesting. You look at these entries and you can kind of see not just what was going on politically in 2025, but also I think kind of some of the broader anxieties and shifts that were happening in society at the time.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that jumps out right away is this tension around government funding.
Right.
So a perennial issue, but this time it feels a bit more, shall we say, urgent.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of urgency here with this potential government shutdown looming on March 14th. And that's where we see some of the first sparks flying. Representative Moskowitz's statement expressing his concern that, these 12 individual spending bills haven't been brought to the floor yet.
Yeah, and he even kind of points the finger at the speaker for not delivering on a promise, which I imagine didn't go over too well.
Right. Right. Well, and this kind of kicks off, a larger debate about the budgeting process itself. Moskowitz, being a Democrat, he's a strong advocate for regular order. Essentially, this means that each spending bill is kind of debated and voted on separately, allows for more scrutiny and transparency. But, not everyone agrees on that approach.
Right. And then we have Representative Biggs, who's a Republican, stepping in with a defense of single subject appropriations bills. His argument is that this approach leads to more accountability and it helps prevent unnecessary spending.
Exactly. And it's important to understand the historical context here. For years, Republicans have been pushing for this single subject approach. They argue it's, more fiscally responsible way to manage the budget. But Democrats often view this as a tactic to push through controversial items without proper scrutiny, which is what Representative McGovern suggests here. He sees the single subject argument as a bit of a smokescreen.
Right. So we already see this classic partisan divide emerging.
Okay.
Democrats pushing for a more deliberative process, Republicans advocating for a more streamlined approach. But this debate about spending isn't just about procedural disagreements. It's also about fundamental differences in priorities and how to allocate resources.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this issue so fascinating. It forces us to ask tough questions about what we value as a society and how those values are reflected in our budget decisions.
For sure. And this leads us to another point of contention. Senator Schumer's claim that Republicans are effectively shutting down parts of the government by halting funding for various programs and agencies.
Yeah, this is a powerful statement, and it really throws fuel on the fire. He's accusing Republicans of, playing politics with essential services and, putting people's lives and well-being at risk. It really reflects a deep distrust between the two parties and underscores the high stakes of these budget battles.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty bold move calling it a shutdown when the lights are still technically on. I guess it depends on, what you consider essential and how those services are being impacted.
Right, exactly. It raises the question of what constitutes a shutdown and whether it can occur incrementally through targeted funding cuts rather than, a complete halt of government operations. And it also shines a light on the power dynamics at play. Each party trying to use the budget as leverage to achieve their policy goals.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think it's safe to say that things are pretty heated on Capitol Hill right now.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that these budget battles aren't just, theoretical exercises. They have very real consequences for people's lives.
Right. A government shutdown can disrupt everything from national parks and museums to scientific research and federal benefits programs. It can impact the economy, erode public trust in government.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial for citizens to, understand these debates and to engage with their elected officials. The decisions made during these budget negotiations have a direct impact on our lives, and it's our responsibility to make our voices heard.
All right, so with all that being said, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about some specific pieces of legislation that are making waves. The first one that caught my eye is the Midnight Rules Relief Act, or H.R. 77.
Yes, this one's fascinating. It's essentially designed to give Congress more power to block these last-minute regulations from outgoing administrations, which has been a concern that's been simmering for years.
Right. It would allow Congress to overturn multiple regulations with a single vote instead of having to address each one individually.
Right. And as you can imagine, this is a very contentious issue. Proponents of the bill, like Representative Fischbach, they argue that it's about reining in executive overreach and preventing this flood of potentially damaging regulations at the end of a president's term. They see it as a way to restore balance between the legislative and executive branches.
But on the other side, we have Representative McGovern raising some serious concerns.
Yeah, he views this as an attempt to, bypass normal legislative processes and silence dissenting voices. Essentially, he fears that the majority party could use this bill to ram through their agenda without proper debate or consideration.
But it becomes this question of power. Who gets to control the regulatory process? And what safeguards are in place to prevent abuse? It really gets to the heart of how our system of checks and balances is supposed to work.
Exactly. And it also reflects a broader debate about the role of government in regulating, various aspects of our lives. Some believe in a more hands-off approach, while others believe that government intervention is necessary to protect consumers, workers, and the environment.
Okay, so we've got a potential government shutdown looming. A heated debate about the power of the executive branch. What else is cooking on Capitol Hill?
Well, next up we have the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, or H.R. 1101. This one's generating a lot of buzz, especially in the tech world.
Yeah, it seems to be a direct response to Elon Musk and his team getting access to the U.S. Treasury payment system. It sparked quite a bit of outrage, particularly among Democrats.
Yeah, this is definitely hitting a nerve. Representatives Caston, Stevens, Moore, and LaHood have all expressed serious concerns about the potential for misuse of taxpayer data and lack of oversight in this situation.
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal considering the sheer volume of sensitive information that flows through the Treasury Department. And in this day and age, data is power.
Absolutely. We live in an era where data breaches and privacy violations are becoming increasingly common, and the potential for abuse is enormous.
Yeah.
So it's understandable that people are on edge about this. It really highlights the anxieties around data privacy and security in a digital world.
Right, and it's not just about protecting personal information. It's also about ensuring the integrity of government systems and preventing fraud or manipulation.
Right. But as with most issues, there's another side to the story. Representative Schweikert, for example, offers a contrasting perspective. He argues that data scientists like those on Musk's team could actually be a valuable asset in identifying waste and fraud within the government.
Interesting. So could this be a case of harnessing technology for good, or is it opening a Pandora's box of potential problems? It's a fascinating debate about the role of technology in governance and the trade-offs between efficiency and privacy.
Precisely. And it raises important questions about who should have access to sensitive data, how that data should be used, and what safeguards are in place to prevent abuse.
Okay, so we've got budget battles, power struggles, and now data privacy concerns. This congressional record entry is shaping up to be quite a thriller. What's next on the agenda?
Next up, we're stepping into the world of high-stakes political appointments, specifically the contentious confirmation processes for two of Trump's nominees, Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Now, those are two names that are sure to stir up some controversy, to say the least.
Absolutely, and we see that controversy playing out right here in the Congressional Record. Senator Schumer and other Democrats are raising serious red flags about both nominees.
It seems like their concerns center around both qualifications and alignment with Trump's agenda.
Exactly. In Gabbard's case, there's the history of making statements that align with Russian propaganda, which is incredibly concerning for someone who would oversee the intelligence community. And with Kennedy Jr., his very prominent stance as a vaccine skeptic raises questions about his suitability to lead the Department of Health and Human Services.
So on one hand, you have the president's prerogatives to nominate individuals who align with his vision. But on the other hand, you have the Senate's responsibility to vet those nominees and ensure they are qualified and fit to serve. It's a classic clash of ideologies and qualifications in political appointments.
It's a fascinating dynamic, and it really highlights the, delicate balance of power between the executive and legislative branches.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already. From budget battles to data privacy concerns to controversial cabinet nominations. And it seems like we're just scratching the surface of this congressional record entry. What else is there to uncover?
Well, next we're going to delve into the realm of international affairs and national security, where we see some stark contrasts and perspectives and some sobering realities coming to light.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's dive in.
All right, so we'll start with Senator Wicker's account of the situation in Ukraine. He paints a very grim picture based on a Wall Street Journal report detailing the horrific torture of Ukrainian prisoners of war by Russian forces.
Wow, that's heavy stuff.
It is, and it's a stark reminder of the brutal reality of war and the human cost of conflict. But what's particularly interesting is how he connects this directly to U.S. foreign policy. He criticizes the Trump administration's dismantling of USA, arguing that it plays a vital role in counterterrorism, global stability, and ultimately national security.
So he's making the case that a strong U.S. aid actually helps prevent situations like the one in Ukraine from happening in the first place. It's an interesting take on the peace through strength concept, where strength isn't just about military might, but also about fostering global development and stability.
Precisely. And it highlights the interconnectedness of domestic politics and foreign policy. What happens on the world stage directly impacts us here at home and vice versa.
For sure. And this debate about U.S. aid also reflects this larger tension between those who believe in a more interventionist foreign policy and those who advocate for a more restrained approach. It's a debate that's been raging for decades, and it's likely to continue for many years to come.
Absolutely. And it's a debate that's often shaped by ideology, by national interests, and by, the perceived threats of the moment.
And speaking of debates, we also see some interesting back and forth about the media and its role in society. Senator Cassidy makes waves with his call to defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or CPB. His argument is that it's outdated, biased, and no longer necessary in the age of streaming services.
It's an argument that resonates with a certain segment of the population, particularly those who feel that CPB has a liberal bias. But it also reflects a broader trend of questioning the role of traditional media institutions in, a rapidly changing media landscape.
Right. And then we have Senator Shaheen on the other side sounding the alarm about the dangers of social media, particularly for children. She proposes a ban on access for those under 13. Her focus is on the negative impact of misinformation addiction and the potential for harm to mental health.
Yeah, it's a powerful argument, and it reflects a growing awareness of the downsides of social media. And it also highlights the challenges of regulating a constantly evolving technological landscape.
Yeah, so we have these two very different visions for how Americans consume and engage with information. One side sees traditional media as outdated and potentially biased, while the other sees social media as a threat to our well-being, particularly for young people.
And both perspectives have merit. It's clear that the media landscape is rapidly evolving. And finding the right balance between access, accountability, and protection will be an ongoing challenge.
Definitely a lot to unpack there. We've covered so much ground already, and we're just getting started. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dig deeper into the themes and implications of these congressional record entries.
Sounds good to me. I'm particularly interested in exploring the, recurring tensions between Republicans and Democrats, the potential for a government shutdown, and the contrasting approaches to international affairs and media.
Sounds good to me. We'll be right back after a short break.
Turn on the mic.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how these international events can kind of spill over into domestic politics. And this entry from Senator Durbin about USA Day is a perfect example.
Yeah, it's like he's saying you can't just build walls and expect problems to stay on the other side. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. And that means investing in global stability.
Right, exactly. And it gets to the heart of this, long-standing debate about the role of American power and influence in the world. Should the U.S. be, actively engaged in promoting democracy and development abroad? Or should we focus more on, our own national interests?
Which brings us to another fascinating debate that's captured in this entry, the clash over the future of media.
Oh, yeah. This is a topic that always seems to be in flux, especially with technology changing so rapidly. Senator Cassidy's call to defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or CPB, really struck a chord.
It did, and his argument that it's outdated and potentially biased definitely taps into a sentiment we see a lot these days, a kind of distrust of traditional institutions.
It's a sentiment that's fueled by a number of factors. The rise of social media, the proliferation of these partisan news outlets, and just a general decline in trust in authority figures.
Right, but then you have Senator Shaheen on the other side sounding the alarm about the dangers of social media, especially for kids. Her proposal to ban access for those under 13 is pretty bold.
It is, and it reflects, I think, a growing concern about the negative impact of social media on mental health, privacy, and even democracy itself.
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen how social media can be used to spread misinformation and sow division. It's almost like a double-edged sword. You can connect people and amplify voices, but it can also be used to manipulate and exploit.
Exactly, and that's the challenge for policymakers. How do you balance the benefits of free speech and access to information with the need to protect individuals and society from harm?
Right, so on one hand, we have concerns about government overreach and censorship, and on the other hand, we have these worries about the unfettered power of tech companies and the spread of harmful content. It's a tricky situation, to say the least.
It is. There are no easy answers. But I think these debates are important because they force us to grapple with some fundamental questions about the role of media in a democratic society.
Okay, let's shift gears again and talk about the tensions surrounding the nominations of Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. These are two figures who've definitely sparked strong reactions from both sides of the aisle.
It's interesting because both of these nominations seem to tap into a deeper unease about the direction of American politics. Gabbard's past statements aligning with Russian propaganda have raised some serious red flags about her judgment and loyalty.
And then you have Kennedy Jr., who's a prominent vaccine skeptic, a stance that's obviously concerning given the ongoing public health challenges we're facing. It's almost like these nominations are forcing a reckoning with the spread of misinformation and this erosion of trust in scientific expertise.
Right, and I think it speaks to this larger question of what qualifies someone for public service in this day and age. Should it be primarily about ideology and loyalty?
Yeah.
Or should experience, expertise, and a commitment to evidence-based decision-making be given more weight?
It's a question that goes beyond these particular nominations. It really gets to the heart of what we value in our leaders and how we want our government to function.
Exactly, and I think it's a conversation that we as citizens need to be having. Who do we trust to lead us? What qualities do we want in our elected officials? And how can we ensure that those who hold positions of power are accountable to the people they serve?
Yeah, these are big questions, and they're not easily answered. But I think the Congressional Record, with all its messy and sometimes contradictory voices, gives us a valuable glimpse into how these debates are playing out in real time.
It's a reminder that democracy is a process, and it's not always pretty. But it's through these debates, these clashes of ideas and perspectives, that we hopefully move closer to a better understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to the issue of government funding, because it seems like that's the one with the most immediate and potentially far-reaching consequences.
You're absolutely right. The possibility of a government shutdown is looming large. And it's important to understand what's at stake here. A shutdown can disrupt essential services, delay critical projects, and have this ripple effect throughout the economy.
It's also a major blow to public trust in government, which is already pretty fragile these days.
Exactly. And it reinforces the perception that our political system is dysfunctional and unable to address the needs of the people.
So what can citizens do to stay informed and engaged on this issue? Where can they go to kind of get beyond the sound bites and the partisan spin?
Well, the Congressional Record itself is a great place to start. It provides this raw and unfiltered look at the debates happening on Capitol Hill, the arguments being made, the positions of different lawmakers.
Yeah, it's like having a front row seat to the political process.
Yeah.
Even if it can get a little messy at times.
Exactly. And there are other resources available as well, independent news organizations, think tanks, government watchdog groups.
It's important to seek out diverse perspectives and to be critical of the information you're consuming. Don't just rely on one source or one point of view.
And most importantly, engage with your elected officials. Let them know what you think, what your concerns are, and how these issues are impacting your life and your community.
Because ultimately, democracy is about more than just casting a vote every few years. It's about active participation, informed engagement, and holding our leaders accountable.
Well said. And on that note, let's move on to the final part of our deep dive. where we'll explore some of the more personal stories and local issues that are woven into this congressional record entry.
Sounds good to me. Let's see what else we can uncover. We've been talking about, these big picture issues, government shutdowns, international affairs, the role of media, but the congressional record also gives us these glimpses into, more personal stories, the kind of things that don't always make the headlines.
That's true. And sometimes those stories can be even more powerful in illustrating the impact of policy decisions. Take, for example, Representative Davis's speech about the fentanyl crisis.
Yeah, that one really hit home. He talked about, the devastating impact of fentanyl in his home state of North Carolina. The families torn apart, the community struggling to cope. It was a powerful reminder that behind the statistics and the policy debates, there are real people whose lives are being shattered by this epidemic.
Yeah, he specifically highlighted the need for a multifaceted approach, supporting bills like the MAP Act, which focuses on border security and holding cartels accountable, and the HLT Fentanyl Act, which aims to permanently classify fentanyl analogs as Schedule I narcotics.
It's clear he sees this as a complex issue. That requires action on multiple fronts, not just a simple, law and order solution.
Right. And then you have Representative Magaziner from Rhode Island offering his perspective. He talked about the need for a comprehensive approach that includes strengthening law enforcement, yes, but also expanding access to treatment and addressing the root causes of addiction.
So it's like he's saying we can't just arrest our way out of this problem. We need to treat addiction as a public health crisis, not just a criminal justice issue.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important point to emphasize. We need to break down the stigma surrounding addiction and provide support for those who are struggling, their families, and their communities.
It's about compassion, not judgment. And it's about recognizing that addiction is a disease, not a moral failing.
Absolutely. And I think it's encouraging to see lawmakers from both sides of the aisle acknowledging the urgency and gravity of this situation.
Yeah, it gives me a little bit of hope that maybe, just maybe, we can find some common ground on this issue and work together to find solutions.
I hope so too, because the human cost of this crisis is simply too high to ignore.
On a slightly lighter note, there were also some moments in the congressional record that really warmed my heart, like when Representative Guthrie talked about Larry Glass Sr., a businessman and philanthropist from Kentucky, and Kai Gamble Lewis, the wife of a former congressman who dedicated her life to serving her community.
Yeah, it's nice to be reminded that even in the midst of all the political wrangling, there are still people out there who are quietly making a difference in their communities. People who are driven by a sense of service and a desire to make the world a better place.
It's like a breath of fresh air, It reminds us that there's more to life than politics, and that these acts of kindness and generosity can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond ourselves.
It also speaks to the importance of community and the bonds that unite us. Those connections are so vital, especially in times of division and polarization.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the congressional record, I'm curious to hear your final thoughts. What stands out to you as the most significant takeaway from this exploration?
I think what strikes me most is the sheer complexity of the issues facing our nation and the interconnectedness of those issues. We've seen how decisions made in one area can have ripple effects in others, and how these seemingly disparate topics are often linked by these common threads. It's a reminder that governing is not a simple task, and finding solutions requires a holistic approach, one that takes into account the interplay of social, economic, political, and global forces.
It's also a reminder that we as citizens have a responsibility to engage with these complex issues and to participate in the democratic process. We can't afford to be passive observers. We need to be active participants in shaping the future of our nation.
And that participation requires more than just casting a vote every few years. It requires staying informed, engaging in respectful dialogue, holding our leaders accountable, and advocating for the policies we believe in.
It's about being, informed, engaged, and empowered citizens.
Yeah.
And using our voices to make a difference.
Well said. And remember, the congressional record is just one tool among many. Seek out diverse perspectives, engage with your elected officials, and most importantly, never stop learning and growing. The future of our democracy depends on it.
Those are some wise words to end on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and thanks to all of you for listening. We encourage you to continue exploring the congressional record and other sources of information, and to stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.